Beautiful like a fresco and fascinating for its idiosyncrasies, Street Fighter III Third Strike is a melting pot of both popular culture and fighting game design. This is the Annotated Third Strike. Thus far into the series, we've seen characters that are both obvious callbacks to past characters in the Street Fighter franchise and those that are wholly unique to the Street Fighter III games. Here, finally, we'll meet our first legacy character with Akuma. And what a legacy he has. Though not one of the original franchise characters, his inclusion into the overall series created shockwaves that are still felt today for what he is, how he's designed, and what he represents. As a member of this game's cast, his inclusion fits perfectly into its more muted and ambiguous tone, and judging by the events of the previous games to this point and his role in the overall plot, is a fascinating case study for what we really believe, or maybe are led to believe, is truly evil. To quote the cliche, the devil is in the details, and with Akuma, those details are why this video series exists. To come to terms with that, it's worth examining the circumstances that birthed him. In the wake of Street Fighter II's runaway success, retention of fandom was undoubtedly on the minds of Capcom. After all, this was primarily an arcade franchise, and one that makes money on continuous play. Certainly, updates to the games like Champion Edition and later Turbo Hyper Fighting would stifle some of the player melt drawn away from new competition, like Midway's Mortal Kombat. But these newer franchises, like Mortal Kombat in particular, devise creative ways to coax players to come back to their arcade cabinets. With Revision 3.0 of the MK board, Midway introduced Reptile, a simple palette swap of stock characters hidden away for players to uncover. Since the actual method of finding and fighting Reptile was obscured by riddles in a time before we could all just look it up on our phones in the moment, Mortal Kombat found itself flush with new and returning players trying to unravel what they thought was a grand and secretive myth. After all, if another character is hidden in the game, what else might be lurking underneath? Reptile created the first hidden character in fighting games, and he remains a stroke of marketing genius. But fandom is easily led astray, and much to Capcom's benefit. In the furor over hidden characters, enthusiast video game publication Electronic Gaming Monthly ran a now infamous April Fool's Day joke in February 1992, stating that a secret character, Ryu and Ken's long-dead teacher, was a hidden boss in Street Fighter II. Pulling from mistranslated win quotes from Ryu that some fans took as an implication that a character named Shang Long hid in the shadows, EGM stoked the series' fans and added many extra quarters to the arcade cabinet's bank by stating that he can be found under absolutely absurd winning conditions. The hoax was called out very quickly after it began, but the damage had been done, and there would be ramifications. Now, it's worth stating here that there's been no official word from Capcom that Akuma was inspired by these two separate, though intertwined events, but it would be foolish to think that they had nothing to do with the character, especially given his backstory, but we'll come back to that in a bit. His first appearance was in Super Street Fighter II Turbo, known as Super Street Fighter II Cross Grand Master Challenge in Japan in February of '94. But he was designed by Akira Yasuda, according to the undisputed Street Fighter coffee table book, during X-Men Children of the Atom's development, as Yasuda was busy animating characters for the latter game. He was asked by Street Fighter II series producer Noritaka Funimizu to make a villain out of a head or palette swap for Ryu, and was only given about an hour to figure out what that would be. But the harsh deadline was productive. Even taking his head by itself, Akuma's design pulls from several influences that one can only infer sprung to Yasuda's mind in the heat of the moment. The first and most obvious influence to those that read Japanese comics is that Akuma bears a striking resemblance to the character of Nosferatu Zod, a sort of noble adversary archetype demi-human from Kentaro Miura's popular manga Berserk, which was in its initial publication run at the time. This is certainly not the first time Capcom artists have been influenced by manga, and as far as this video series is concerned, it won't be the last. Going deeper, fans have found that the character also bears resemblance to Bishamonten, also known as Vaisarvana, one of the four heavenly kings from many countries' Buddhist beliefs, and is known as one of the 7 lucky gods in Japanese Buddhism, where he's something of a god of war. There's also some likeness similarities to one half of the Neo, which are muscular wrestler-type statues traditionally found protecting Buddhist temples, particularly in Japan. Of them, Akira represents the Agyo side, the wrathful, open-mouthed statue that represents overt violence. As the Street Fighter series continued, this connection was made more prevalent with the inclusion of his brother Goken, representing the Unyo, that of quiet, latent strength. You could also make a case that Ryu himself represents this, as that he's often depicted as a stoic and driven, more of a strong, silent-type character. With the visual design in place, Capcom went to work creating a backstory that took advantage of the EGM April Fool's joke and combined it with their own official comic book adaptation, Street Fighter II Ryu by Masami Kanzaki, which had ended its initial series run in Family Computer magazine in 1993. In the manga, Ken and Ryu were trained by the monk-like Goken, whom was featured prominently in the story until Vega, Sagat, and M. Bison killed him in an invasion of their dojo. Official franchise Bibles, like the Street Fighter Eternal Challenge, retcon this incident so that Akuma, known in Japan as Goki, trained with Goken, his older brother, in an unnamed assassin-style martial art pioneered and taught by a man named Go Tetsu. Having succumbed to his darker impulses, Akuma found that killing his opponents was the true endpoint for the style, and murdered both Go Tetsu and Goken before disappearing. This dark side was given a name, the Satsui no Hado, which means a wave or surge of murderous intent. Capcom USA employee Sam Smith changed his name to Akuma, which means devil in Japanese, for his Western appearances. In an interview with Polygon, he stated that there were, quote, too many G-guys in a franchise already, and that he heard a, quote, wacky news story from Japan about parents wanting to name their children after the devil, and the name stuck. The name tracks with his Japanese appearance, as the kanji for Goki translates into Great Demon. Goken can translate into Great Fist. Gotetsu likewise can translate into Great Iron, as in Iron Fist. Another iconic piece of Akuma's design is probably inspired by Kanzaki's manga as well, the kanji for ten, or heaven, that appears on his back after a match, or during certain win conditions on screen. In the comic, after suffering a defeat from a brainwashed Ken, Ryu returns to the grand finals of the competition with the kanji mu, or nothing, written on the back of his gi. In the story, this was to signify that Ryu had to empty himself to a void-like state to push past his limits and defeat the evil M. Bison. Ironically, the point past his limits is what Akuma represents in many ways. The Ten kanji itself also calls back to the religious design references. The boss characters of the Street Fighter II series are referred to as the Four Kings of Shadowloo, which is a reference to the Four Heavenly Kings, or Shitenno, in Japanese Buddhism. Though not always depicted as good, virtuous, or even, quote, heavenly, these are devas that rule over the cardinal directions of north, east, south, and west, and are frequently placed in Japanese pop culture, according to the Japanese translation website Legends of Localization. As Akuma proves to be mightier than the rest in his Super Street Fighter II Turbo debut, it could be alluding to the fact that the Four Kings are something of false idols, compared to his own strength. The final piece of his visual design is the beaded necklace that's barely visible in his early appearances, but became more prominent in Akuma's designs for the Alpha series and for Street Fighter III. This is called a mala, which is a Buddhist or Hindu object used for prayer. Practitioners would employ them to count times a mantra is recited, breaths while meditating, and other such pious functions, not unlike a Roman Catholic rosary. The manga adaptations of the Street Fighter III games titled Ryu Final confirms that these once belonged to his brother Goken, but this was recently retconned by the official Capcom Fighters Network profiles to have been owned by their teacher Gotetsu, though Goken is seen wearing them in the Kanzaki Street Fighter II manga. Ryu Final by Masahiko Nakahira is a piece of work that we'll be referring back to quite a bit in this video series. Capcom's designers read manga, as evidenced by various decisions made on characters we've already seen and will see in the future. But it's interesting to note that they clearly read their own manga, and often implement what's found there into visual and narrative concepts featured in the games. Yet another case for this is Akuma's somewhat aloof personality. Between his fearsome appearance, cruel and brutal win quotes in every game, and again, the fact that his name literally translates into devil, it's easy to assume that he's a mustache-twirling maniacal evil. But reading between the lines, the games and the comics prove that this is ultimately not the case, which brings us to what he ultimately represents. His backstory clearly mirrors that of series protagonists Ryu and Ken, and that he was training with a colleague and rival at a young age, when his pursuit of perfection drove him to do evil deeds, his thirst to push his body past its capabilities altering his morals. While Ryu and Ken have been there since the beginning, Akuma's later inclusion into the cast creates a new dimension for themes of rivalry and brotherhood that the overall series would circle back to time and again. Yet while he also gave existing characters a more personal foe to overcome than that of the actual cackling madman in Bison Vega, Akuma also represents a cautionary tale for Ryu. Without getting too far ahead of ourselves, Ryu's ultimate purpose, as Ryu Final reminds us, is that he longs to be, quote, a true martial artist, to overcome his limitations and take his physical, mental, and spiritual self to new levels. Akuma's appearance in games like the Alpha series sometimes cast him as a Faustian tempter to bring Ryu closer to the Satsui no Hado, but this is only to bring the series' de facto hero up to his own level to test his limits yet again. In fact, Akuma's various interactions with characters in the Alpha games, like his final showdown with Bison, paint him more as an angel of death. He punishes hubris and self-importance, and these are often traits found in the larger franchise held by the more traditionally evil characters. Yet he often kills his opponents for crossing him, which isn't exactly a just response to having a large ego, but Akuma as a character then represents an age-old dilemma. Pushing yourself to achieve and overcome is an admirable goal, but at what price? Power. And so we see this character step through the overall series in a continued search for more powerful opponents, which, again, drives Ryu. In Third Strike, that leads him back to a silent, tense fight with Ryu that echoes his interaction with the series' main protagonist from Second Impact. Though he'll also fight a mirror image of himself with dialogue in that game as well. Of course, this is just a stop before his final battle with Gil, where God, in a sense, fights the devil. Let's take a look at his endings as they play on the right. As he's constantly finding mountains to climb, Akuma is also a character that we've seen develop slowly but powerfully as the franchise has moved forward, but in a relative real time. First is his ending in Second Impact, which was the first game he appeared in the Street Fighter III series as, you guessed it, a hidden character. Training by himself late into the night at Uluru, also known as Ayers Rock in Central Australia, he developed the Kengo Kokuretsuzan in a scene taken directly out of the second volume of Ryu Final. This move was implemented into Third Strike, which we'll see in a little bit. The ending of this game, and notice the name of the ship as a reference to Street Fighter III's arcade board, is another evolution, as Akuma's body's withstanding the pressure of the deep sea while he develops the Tensho Kodaikijin. This is a move that later appeared in Super Street Fighter IV Arcade Edition in 2011, though that game takes place before the Street Fighter III series canonically. According to the Street Fighter wiki on fandom.com, the technique translates into, quote, heaven-piercing sea plowing blade, but is commonly referred to by Western audiences as the Demon Armageddon. At face value, these endings prove that, like any other fighter, Akuma is still learning and evolving. As we've seen in previous games in the overall franchise, though, he holds himself back. His playable appearances in games after Street Fighter Alpha generally weaken him one way or another. And this is a byproduct of having him cross over from his stature as an optional super boss to a regularly selectable character. Indeed, ask any Super Street Fighter II Turbo player and you'll find that he's banned in practically every tournament because of his jumping fireball alone. As a way of sort of explaining away the differences between Akuma the boss versus Akuma the player, many Street Fighter games implement an optional hidden boss known as Shin Akuma, the Shin meaning true. Generally, this means a faster character with either stronger or multi-shot air fireballs, but it's different per game. Shin Akuma existed in Second Impact. By winning the single-player mode without losing a round and finishing most with super arts, a fight with Akuma is triggered in place of the normal end boss, which will then resurrect into Shin Akuma if the player wins under certain conditions. In that game, he was also an optional hidden character to select. Curiously, Shin Akuma is present in Third Strike, but is buried in the code and not selectable in any way without hacking the game. According to website The Cutting Room Floor, he's surprisingly complete. On the opponent select screen in single-player mode, Akuma's stage is Kosyo Street at 1:55 a.m. The name can translate into high place, and though this looks like a somewhat rural setting, such a common phrase for a roadside may as well be High or Elm or State Street to those in the West. What's probably more interesting are the small statues near the left. These are Jizo statues, the Japanese representation of Indian Buddhist Bodhisattva Ksitigarbha. These statues are somewhat common on roadsides, as are other representations of deities, but are there to protect travelers. Jizo, or formerly Ojizo-sama, is something of a patron for deceased children and the unborn, hence the red bibs that are often placed on them. This may also be a subtle callback to Fight for the Future, and we'll see in a future video how important protecting children can be. The song in the stage is called Killing Moon. It's probably not a reference to the Echo and the Bunnymen song Under a Killing Moon, but it doesn't hurt to mention it. Much like Shin Akuma, an alternate Kosyo Street stage exists in the game's code that recolors the background a foreboding red hue. In all the character's appearances after his debut in Super Turbo, where he simply uttered nondescript grunts taken from the other cast, Akuma has been voiced by Tomomochi Nishimura, and Third Strike is no exception. Nishimura lent his voice to the character through 2004's SVC Chaos and Capcom Fighting Evolution as the dark age of fighting games set in. It was then handed off to an actor going by the name of Taketora, whom has voiced the character ever since Street Fighter IV starting in 2008. As Akuma is the Street Fighter series' definitive hidden character, let's move into his gameplay while also noting something hidden in Third Strike, a 7th color palette. As you've seen in these videos so far, colors for characters rotate to show every option, and these are normally selected by a different attack button on the character select screen. However, pressing light punch, hard punch, and medium kick simultaneously will produce a 7th hidden color for every character. Home versions of Third Strike also added further options. Akuma represents one of 3 traditional Shoto clones along with Ryu and Ken. Also, like his stylistic brethren, he shares 3 signature special moves with key differences that we'll see in a moment. Distinct about Akuma in Third Strike is that he's the only character without EX variations of his specials. This is probably because he's possibly the most versatile character in the game. Nearly all of his special moves have practical application, and while he can be played defensively if need be, most Akuma players go out of their way to steamroll opponents with aggressive play. We can infer that EX moves would have made him too powerful, since no real explanation about their expulsion has been given. Also of note is that all 3 of his super arts have the same length of meter at the bottom of the screen. Again, no explanation why, but I like to think that this tells us that he's powerful no matter what. As his normal moves go, he's perhaps more akin to Ryu than Ken and Sean, but note the open palm of his standing medium punch. His standing hard punch has nice range and stabs outward for some good pushback, which many players use for grounded cornered pressure. He can also target combo it from close medium punch, but there are better ways to rack up damage, so it's not commonly seen at high level. His standing medium kick is a nice poke, but cannot be comboed. His crouching normals are the same across the board as the other Shotos, but with a bit less recovery than Sean. Still not completely safe even on hit at the highest level, but only the crouching hard kick sweep is damning. In addition to his universal overhead, his normal overhead move with forward and medium punch hits twice, again like Ryu's overhead, but it's worth indulging for a moment for a glitch found in the game's code that technically lists him as being in a jumping state while performing this move. In practical terms, this means that Akuma is invincible to throws during its animation, even command throws and super arts. But this is just a brief glimpse into the differences between Ryu, Ken, and Akuma. Technically, an inexperienced player may be able to use all 3 characters in essentially the same ways, but the differences mount very quickly in practical use. Take his Fireball, which is officially called the Go Hadouken or Great Wave Motion Fist when he uses it. On the ground, it's less strong than Ryu for its recovery time, but faster than Ken's, which can be punished point blank on hit. Like the others, the strength of the button press determines speed and is used in maybe the most classic example of a combo in all of fighting games. But Akuma can toss his at a downward angle in the air, officially called the Zanku Hadouken, or Sky Slashing Wave Motion Strike, which is something of a signature move for him. This opens up plenty of avenues for shifty mix-ups and pressure. Further, he has a variation on the red Fireball. Perform with a half circle back and a punch button that determines how many hits it inflicts. This is a variation of Ryu's EX Fireball, the history of which we'll see in his respective video. Likewise, Akuma's Hurricane Kick, which for him is called the Tatsumaki Zanku Kyaku, or Sky Slashing Cyclone Kick, is a middle ground between the opportunity for added hits like Ken with some of the knockdown potential of Ryu. It also acts as a launcher. Better, its hitbox extends lower to the ground than that of the others, which makes it problematic for taller characters like Urien and can unexpectedly hit most of the cast from behind after it sails overhead. His Go Shoryuken, or Great Rising Dragon Fist, doesn't travel the same distance as Ken's, but will hit multiple times depending on the punch button pressed for more ideal anti-air situations and super art combo application. Most often it's seen as the last component of a Tatsu combo. Circling back around them, when all 3 of these signature moves are discussed in comparison to the other characters he mirrors, with their added hits and oddball properties, it seems that Akuma already has EX moves. They're simply baked into his normal play. Yet here's where Akuma's moveset starts to dramatically turn. While other characters like Ibuki have command moves to shuffle her in and out of danger, Akuma is the only character in the game with a legitimate teleport, the Ashura Senku, or Ashura Air Flash, executed by a Dragon Punch with either 2 punches or kicks. Punch teleports will send him greater distances, but the real beauty of this move is that it can be used as a reversal to get out of sticky corner situations. It's not perfect though. Since it has 20 frames of startup animation, a reactive player can cancel a teleport with a super art if they activate it right away. The screen freeze will break the teleport, which is perhaps a bug. The name of the moon coins the name of a class of divine beings called the Ashuras in Hindu mythology. According to Wikipedia, these are powerful superhuman demigods with good and bad qualities that are often considered nature spirits, such as Agni, whom is closely associated with fire, and Indra, whom is connected to thunder and lightning. Replacing a ground role like Sean's found in Second Impact, though, is maybe Akuma's greatest asset, the Hyakushu, which translates into 100 Spirit Attack, but is commonly referred to as the Demon Flip. Performed with a Dragon Punch motion and a kick to determine distance travel, this is essentially a starter for a handful of outcomes. Do nothing and you'll end with a low slide for a knockdown. Press a punch and it'll palm the opponent, also for a knockdown, but the hit is tricky to time. Press both light punch and light kick will perform a throw, which cannot be throw tech. Finally, a kick button will perform a dive kick, which is the most commonly used action for the constant pressure it grants. Like the teleport, a reactive player can find easy ways to knock Akuma out of the air in the startup, but this simple array of options is a real guessing game for opponents. Smart players can use the odd timing of both the dive kick and the palm to land unexpectedly and harass opponents. And the threat of the throw always looms for opponents playing too defensively. Akuma had this move in the first Street Fighter Alpha game in 1995, but this originated with British Special Forces agent Cammy, whom was gifted a variation of this move as the Hooligan Throw in Super Turbo in 94. The dive kick is an essential piece of high-level Akuma play, and not only with the Demon Flip. He can perform it by itself by jumping toward an opponent and pressing down and medium kick, which eliminates the pesky startup time of the flip. With the two combined to throw opponents timing off balance, top-tier Akuma players tend to bully their enemies, especially characters like Urien and Alex for their added height. With his super arts, Akuma again splits the difference between Ken and Ryu while also possessing some of the more powerful single attacks in the game. His first, the Meisatsu Gohado, or Deadly Great Surge, is a super fireball with a lot of width, which makes it usable in a wide variety of combo situations. It can also be performed in the air, which officially changes the name to Tenma Gozanku, or Demon Great Sky Slash. Curiously, the air variation causes more damage, but has much fewer combo options. This is the most commonly played super art. As a brief aside, the kanji that appears over Akuma's shoulder reads Metsu, which translates into destruction. It also manifests during his taunt, which increases his attack and stun damage for all of his moves. It's also probably a reference to this page in Masahiko Nakahira's 1995 Street Fighter Alpha manga, where he makes a very brief appearance. The second, the Meisatsu Go Shoryu, or Deadly Great Rising Dragon, is his least. Basically 3 dragon punches in succession and pretty much an exact copy of Ken's Shoryu Reppa. The majority of the damage comes on the back end of the sequence. It has fewer useful combo applications than the fireball and can occasionally drop the combo mid-attack, and it leaves him pretty open to punishment. The third, the Meisatsu Go Rasen, or Deadly Great Spiral, is unique to Akuma and will occasionally be found in tournament play. It's a tatsu floating upward that will vacuum an opponent in, but again leaves him wide open to punish situations. This can also be used in the air, changing its official name to the Meisatsu Go Senpu, or Deadly Great Whirlwind, and this added use edges it out over SA2, though the latter super is his most damaging of the 3. And again, since we're talking about Akuma and things hidden beneath the surface, it's here that we point out that he's blessed with not one, but 2 legitimately secret super arts. Not simply variations or powered-up versions of existing super arts that, say, Urien possesses. Both of them require 2 full stocks of meter. The first is his famous Shungokusatsu, or Raging Demon, though the name translates closer into instant hell murder. This is a move used in his famous Super Street Fighter II Turbo introduction when he dispatches Bison before challenging the player. It has a unique input, light punch, light kick, forward, and then hard punch, and has to be done in a fairly rapid typed succession. Technically, it's a hold as far as the game is concerned, but its major use is in its brief teleport forward, which comes armed with a few frames of invincibility on startup. Ending around with it will cause the famous Tenkanji to appear, as in other games in which it shows up, with added flame effect in the Street Fighter III games. I mentioned in past videos that characters can cancel early frames of normal moves to add some forward movement. This is a slightly advanced gameplay technique called Kara moves. It's worth doing some research into proper Kara moves for each member of the cast, but it's worth pointing out Akuma's for a few reasons. First, like some of his castmates, Akuma can Kara throw by borrowing frames of his overhead to scoot him forward, granting him not only added throw range, but the brief throw invincibility that his overhead glitch grants him. Since he always grunts when performing the overhead, many beginner Street Fighter III players practice Kara throws with Akuma because it gives them an audio cue if it works. The reason I bring this up now is that advanced players use this technique in what is colloquially called the Kara Demon. This uses frames of the overhead to cancel into the Shungokusatsu. It takes substantial practice to perfect, but the benefit is that at a certain range the Kara Demon cannot be avoided, granting massive free damage. Finally, there is the Kango Kokuretsuzan, or KKZ for short, which translates into the very charming, country-destroying Great Adamantine Slash. This is the single most damaging move a player can use in the game, even dealing substantial chip damage to an opponent block. The startup for this move is long, but grants Akuma a wide window of invincibility, making it a useful wake-up reversal or round ender against a player backed into a corner. Critically, the first hit of this move cannot be parried, but the rest can. This means that an opponent opponent can block and then red parry the rest of the hits, or if they super jump at the right moment, they may leap the first hit and air parry the rest. But these are both very difficult things to time. Both of these hidden supers are all or nothing prospects due to the high cost of execution, but in the right hands are absolutely devastating. But those are just two powerful options in a spectacular tool set. As such, Akuma players and teams of them appear in tournaments with some frequency, but he's still not considered in the upper strata of the cast. As another way of making him fair, Akuma has some of the lowest health in the game, something that's become traditional across his appearances in the overall franchise, and has one of the smallest stun bars. Characters with movesets that lend a heavy stun like Necro, Hugo, and Makoto can end an Akuma onslaught, in some cases with a single touch. This is something of a major flaw, making the character the quintessential glass cannon of Third Strike. He's well adjusted to the rest of the characters in the game, and while he has a vast arsenal of useful moves and strong techniques, he's in no way broken, especially compared to what we'll cover in future videos. A demon from the fighting game Underworld maybe, but for this game, he's powerfully down to earth.